So last week we talked a lot about Naboo, discussing the history of that planet after the Clone Wars and the life and death of Captain Panaka. But in those videos I discussed the Naboo Royal Security Forces a lot, and I've never actually done a video talking about who they were, so I figured today we could dive a little bit deeper into the Naboo Royal Security Forces, what role they played on Naboo, and what role they played in the larger galaxy as a whole. I'm Colin, and this is Sci-Fi Deep Dive. Remember, if you enjoyed this video, head down below and hit that subscribe button. So, we all at least kind of know what the Naboo Royal Security Forces are. They are the forces tasked with defending Naboo. We see them prominently during the Naboo Crisis, before the outbreak of the Clone Wars and the events of the Phantom Menace. But let's talk a little bit about the actual role they filled, because it's not quite as obvious as it may look. Now, in the events of the Naboo Crisis, we ultimately see them acting as basically Naboo's standing military, but in reality they were far from that. They were a relatively small defensive force consisting of only three, they're referred to as divisions, but they function more like branches. A Royal Defense Branch tasked with defending the Monarch and the palace itself, a General Guards Unit tasked with policing and maintaining order across the planet, and a Starfighter Corps, which primarily was ceremonial in nature, but was capable of fighting in rare circumstances like the Battle of Naboo. On the planet of Naboo itself, they were tasked with, like I mentioned, policing. The guards element of that organization would patrol the streets and perform law enforcement duties, and would be there to step in if local law enforcement couldn't handle a situation. And while they could be used in military circumstances, like during the Battle of Theed, for example, that wasn't really what they were designed for, and as a result, they generally have fairly light small arms weapons and a few light vehicles. The most militarily capable arm of the Naboo Royal Security Forces was likely their Starfighter Corps, which once again was primarily ceremonial, but did have some fairly maneuverable and capable fighter craft at their disposal. The Royal Guards are pretty self-explanatory in being tasked with defending royalty and the monarchy. They were tasked with protecting the palace and the monarch themselves. They were sort of specialized in preventing things like assassinations and generally guarding the palace grounds. In fact, this might have been one of the largest elements within the Naboo Royal Security Forces, because they were the only ones that really had an active job. Everyone else was patrolling the streets and keeping order on a relatively peaceful planet, while the guards, the palace guards, were tasked with protecting a monarch who could be assassinated at any time, especially after the Naboo Crisis, when Naboo had made some seriously capable enemies. And in relation to their activities on Naboo, the last branch here is the Starfighter Corps, which, like I mentioned, is primarily ceremonial. They would often carry out flyovers over large ceremonies or big events that the Naboo government wanted to be represented at, but they also could carry out light patrol duties and, as we see during the Battle of Naboo, occasionally engage in large space battles, albeit not as effectively as one would like. That being said, the Naboo Royal Security Forces jobs don't end when they leave Naboo. There are other deployments that these units are seen being active on. For example, protecting Naboo's senator on Coruscant. We see this a lot, particularly during the Separatist crisis leading up to the start of the Clone Wars, when Padme Amidala, the senator from Naboo, became a target for Trade Federation assassins who were looking for vengeance following the debacle that was the Naboo Crisis. It was the Naboo Royal Security Forces who ultimately ended up setting up the body double that would take the bomb for Padme on the landing platform shortly before the outbreak of the Clone Wars. This detail would ultimately be tasked with following Naboo's senator wherever they went, and that led them all over the galaxy as a minor security detail. Now, it's worth noting that the security contingent tied to Naboo's senator was likely relatively small, only a handful of security operatives, maybe 4 or 5, but that's still a large portion when you realize that the Naboo security forces as a whole is a relatively small organization. All that to be said, the Naboo Royal Security Forces found their way into nearly every facet of the Republic at one point or another in the years leading up to and during the Clone Wars. If you'd like to learn more about what happened to Naboo after the end of the war. I'll leave a link up here to a video I have that I put out last week about the story of Naboo after the end of the Clone Wars and what happened to that planet and those security forces as the Empire came to power. And if you have anything else you'd like to see me cover in Star Wars or anywhere else in science fiction, you can let me know down below in the comments. Last but not least, if you enjoyed this video, head down below, hit the like button, the subscribe button, and the bell icon so you get notified when I upload new videos. So for Sci-Fi Deep Dive, I'm Colin, and I will see you next time.